Welcome to the Once and Future Authors Podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm super excited today to be joined by author Lynn Zimmering. Lynn is the author of My Pandemic Paradox, Volume 2, May 2021 to July 2023. Well, if there's a Volume 2, you know that there was a Volume 1, so somebody was very, very busy during pandemic. So please meet author Lynn Zimmering. Thanks so much for joining me.
I'm sorry, say again.
Thanks for joining me.
So my pleasure.
And so while some of us during lockdown were watching a million movies, you were writing.
That's true. Yeah.
Tell me what got you started with the writing during lockdown.
Well, it was kind of accidental. I was home alone. I live alone. And at the time I lived in New Jersey. And so there I was in my apartment and my computer, and I overlooked Manhattan. And I always try to think to myself, what would it be like to actually live in Manhattan? Which, of course, I was born here, So now I live in actually Manhattan. But during that period of time, I kind of was, I don't know, going about my thing. And I suddenly realized 6 weeks had gone by and I hadn't touched another human being in all that time. And how come I don't feel more about it? Or how come I'm so alone all the time? I mean, we always have a telephone, but it's not the same. So I decided to write down my thoughts, and it was really not intended to become a new career. It was just kind of an intention to write what I was feeling. So I did that, and it felt good. So then I did it again, and then I did it again. So finally, I didn't know what to do with these things. It's sort of like I put them on Medium. One of my sons suggested that I use Medium because it was easy. And it is. And so I started doing that and publishing them on there. And then I was like, when a painter paints a painting, they don't like to just then put it in a closet and close the door, right? So it's sort of the same thing. I thought to myself, wouldn't this be great if people could read what I wrote? So that's how it started.
Fantastic. Well, what a great way to spend lockdown.
Yeah.
And not just that you were spending your time, but that you were thinking about what other people and what you were going through and really, was
right.
Looking back now, I know at the time none of us were pretty happy with that, that's for sure. But looking back now, it was kind of a really interesting time, just different. I mean, you've lived a long time. Was this your first pandemic?
Yes. But it's very interesting because one of the things that I wrote about when I got into this was the fact that my mother would never allow me to wear purple. And the reason was that she lived through the 1918 pandemic.
Right.
And a friend of hers, and she was a young kid at the time, a teenager, and one of her friends died, and they had her in her coffin, all wrapped in purple and lavender tulle.
Oh.
And so she never would allow me to wear purple. And then I finally got the reason one time, and that was the reason.
Yeah, wow. Oh my goodness. And now that you've lived through your first pandemic, I hope it's my first and last. That was really rough. I don't know if I want to do that again.
Oh, it was terrible. Yeah, it was.
It was just like you said, 6 weeks you didn't even touch another person. That's,
right.
difficult.
And it ended up being much longer than that.
I know.
Right. So one of the things I realized in one of my first blogs was I could have been an astronaut. I mean, they are alone in space all the time. And that was sort of how I felt, like suspended in my little, well, it was a bigger apartment than I have now, but it was, I had everything I needed for groceries. My kids, my daughter and son-in-law, they would go shopping, bring the groceries to the downstairs, the doorman, and then I would go down and get them, and then we would meet secretly face to face near the garage. You know,
and waving at each other. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We went for walks where I walked on the sidewalk and they walked in the street because that was enough time, space in between. Well, you remember what it was.
I remember because we wanted so much not to hurt each other.
Yes.
You know, that was the thing, is we wanted so much. I'm sure your son-in-law and daughter wanted so much not to make you sick. And
yes,
they couldn't guarantee that they weren't carrying something. So you stayed on the sidewalk and they stayed in the street.
right. Exactly.
It was a terribly difficult time. I mean, just
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but when it first started, I thought, 2 weeks. We'll stay home for 2 weeks. God, that went on for a lot more than 2 weeks.
Exactly. I know. And so when I went to write the title of my book, I came up with a lot of different options, which, was only natural. But I realized that it was really based in the pandemic. And the paradoxical thing about it was that something very good came out of something that was very bad. And so that was how I got to the title.
Yes. And well, I'm so glad for you that you allowed something good to come out of it in your life, because that was a choice. That was a decision you made, that you wanted something good to come out of this something very bad.
Right.
Not
Exactly.
everybody made that choice. You know that. Some people wallowed for all that time, and you made the choice to do something constructive.
Right. Exactly.
Which was
So that was how it was. And that's really, well, I had done some writing before that. I worked for Unilever for about 12 years. While I was there, I was the supervisor, and I had product responsibility as well as personnel responsibility. So they came up with a whole new line of products, and everybody was too busy to write the manual because I was in the 800 number department, where people called in with all kinds of things to say. And one of the things that they were talking about was their age, and how a woman one time called me because, Unilever produced a product called Whisk. Did you ever hear of Whisk? Yeah. So that was their product. And she was calling up because she wanted to know how to get a stain out of something. And of course, I had the whole manual in front of me. And that was the kind of thing that I was writing for this new hair product. But anyway, that woman, it was interesting. She said she needed to get a stain out of something. How do you do it? So I proceeded to tell her. She got very annoyed. And she said to me, I'm 59 years old. Don't you think I know how to do my laundry? Well, I was like, okay, that's fine. So, yeah, it was really fine. But anyway, I thought to myself, I'm older than her. When I started, I was already 60, 61, and I decided I would never have that attitude. It was a terrible attitude.
Oh, right. Wait. You started working at Unilever when you were 61?
Yes. Well, I got a job. I had a business before. I was like in the French Far Legion. I did everything. But one of the things I did was I was a recruiter, and I had my own business in recruiting in the data field, which I knew nothing about. Nothing. And so for the first 2 weeks that I was there, I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of reading. But it was basically sort of by the seat of my pants, that I was able to get through this time. And after a while, it was the 1989, there was a recession. My business fell to nothing. I moved the business from an office to my home. I had a big apartment at the time. And I started thinking about, I don't always want to do this. I really didn't enjoy the career at all. So And I was in my own business, as I said, and my partner was a nutcase. So we decided to close the business. And so I figured I would continue by myself, but I saw an ad in the paper for Unilever, and they were looking for phone reps. And I knew that I had spent so much time on the telephone in my life that that would be a good thing for me. So they hired me.
Wow. And then you said you were at Unilever for 12 years.
Well, yes. What happened was I was getting divorced and I needed a full-time job. That was a part-time job. So I asked them if they would like to hire me full-time. And it's not easy to get this done because, then I would have benefits and all of
Right.
this. But
Exactly.
anyway, I talked my way into it and I became a full-time employee there. And I started out, so as a part-time phone rep, and I ended up as a supervisor with, at one time, I think I had like 38 people that were reporting to me. It was really amazing. And then I retired. I was 72 when I retired, and they had published a list of, they offered this wonderful financial package. So I figured, what the heck, I might as well take it. So I did. And then they published a list of the title of the person and the age, not the name. And I realized that 72 as a supervisor, there was not another one but me.
Right,
So
right.
that was me. And yeah, so and my retirement was great. And then what did I do after that? Oh, I went to work for Weight Watchers. And yeah, and I had learned a lot about food. And, because Unilever also has a lot of food products, Hellman products we learned all about, but a lot of training, a lot of training. And so by the time, and of course, I was by that time a diabetic. I'm a type 1 diabetic. So because of that, I knew a lot. So I really had a lot of information that I was able to use. And I was also a life coach.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, when I'm talking about French Foreign Legion, I really mean that. Yeah. So, yeah, that was how.
So Weight Watchers was after you retired from Unilever, after you were in your 70s.
That's right. I was 72. Right.
What haven't you done yet?
Well, if there was anything I could think of, I would do it. I mean, it just seems to be that kind of an attitude that I have. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. You are such an inspiration. All those people who are thinking they're hanging it up at, 65, you were just starting the first of many careers at that point.
No, actually, I got laid off. That was another reason I started writing. I got laid off. I was 88, and it was on my 88th birthday that Unilever laid me off, along with 100 other people. But, they were no longer able to have meetings, and I was a meeting leader for a while. And yeah, so that was it. Then I had nothing to do. And for me to have nothing to do is really bad. So I have to find something to do all the time.
So you were 88 years old. You were out of a job, so you decided to write two books. I'm loving
Well,
this.
I didn't know. I didn't. I mean, I I just started writing, and after a while, I have a lot of friends, and one particular one, um, we lived together. I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, for a while, and I met her there, and she said to me, "Wouldn't it nice? What are you going to do with all these blogs?" I said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "Why not put them together in a book form and send them as gifts to your family?" And I said, that's a really good idea. And that was really how she's responsible.
Wow. I just love where your life has gone, and I love that it has gone. You're incredibly. So I said there are so many people I know who they figure I hit 60, that AARP card came in the mail, I'm done, and you just started your life then.
My third, fourth, fifth life. Yeah.
It makes us wonder if you won't actually be an astronaut at some point.
Oh, right.
You
Well,
never
it was the
knew.
alone part about it.
Yes.
And also the feeling part about it. In other words, I was brought up my mother used to say to me all the time when I would do whatever, "You're not entitled to feel that way, young lady." That's what she said. And so I was brought up to have no feelings. And I didn't know what to do about that. And I noticed that I was missing something. So there was no reason for me not to feel upset by the fact that I was home alone all that time in the pandemic. And I knew that I had the feelings in there, but it took me, and still does a lot, days to figure out how I felt about something. So that was kind of strange.
But this was a real growing experience for you then, tapping into those feelings and allowing yourself to feel.
Exactly. And it was a discovery process. You know, I had to like dig into myself and then ask myself the question when I wrote something down, does this sentence say what I wanted to say? Mm. So I was doing that. So it became, and it was very easy for me to write, by the way. Somehow I sat at my computer and my fingers just typed, and I'm typing away all the time. So that's how it ended up.
I'm telling you, such an inspiration, not just in all that you've done, even at ages that others have not, but to have the courage when you were brought up in a very restrained sort of a way to say, you know what, there's more than this. I'm going to discover something about myself and express myself. A lot of people are very bound by their childhood experiences. And it sounds like you were able to look at those childhood experiences and move beyond them, which is amazing.
Well, it was a journey. I mean, it was really, and when I was writing, wasn't my intention to write this as this is my life and then write. I was 10, I was 11, I was 12. You know, I just was writing. And sort of as I got into it further, I would ask myself, because I did this weekly, I would ask myself, what was the best thing that happened to me this week? Or what was I focusing on this week? And then I wrote it. So not all of it has to do with my childhood, but a lot of it does. Yeah.
Great. That's really great. You were almost like your own therapist through this whole process.
Very much so. And having had a lot of therapy that was not my own therapy throughout my it was helpful. And of course, I have a master's degree in psychology. So that too, basically, we had moved back from Providence to New Jersey. And all my friends were in Providence, and I really had nothing to do. So I decided I would go back to school. And I did, and I got a master's degree at a much later degree than my original one.
Right.
And it was in general and experimental psychology. So it wasn't exactly therapeutic. I was never a therapist, you know, but I did become a life coach, as I mentioned.
Yes.
But that was really the training of to become a life coach was the best therapy I ever had. Because one of the things that's important to do as a life coach is to not present yourself the solution to somebody else's problem from your experience. So from that, you have to really understand your own experience and what it was like so that you could come to a person, a client, as an empty vessel and listen to what they say and then be able to describe, have them find their own answers to their problems. So that was very interesting. And it was through therapy part of the reason that I managed to evolve. Yeah.
Amazing. Just amazing. Now, I understand you are still writing. The book might have been published, but the pen keeps pen or do you do it on the computer? Which,
Computer, oh, well, because I have a tremor, I can't write anything, right?
well, they also the computer spell checks for you, so there's that.
That's right.
Who wants
Right,
to write with a pen anymore? You could
right, right.
have the computer spell check for you. And you mentioned to me that you wrote a blog post since then. Would you share that with us?
Sure.
I would love it.
It's short, so, but it was just right on topic. So the name of it is called It's Not Over. And the byline is I'm into a late in life new career. I can hardly believe I started doing this new creative thing when I was 88 years old. Now I'm about to turn 92. I didn't mean for it to happen, but once it started, it developed a life of its own. It was only after the first 2 years of its execution that I dared to think of myself as a writer. I thought of myself as a woman, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great grandmother. And that was easy. Remaining alive accounted for that. But this moniker, writer, was a departure from what I imagined my life to be about. I have been an unfulfilled dancer, painter, pianist, French horn student, life coach, stockbroker, and corporate executive. As a writer, it was and is ongoing and insightful. I explore my topics thoroughly and have learned that fear has to vanish to get an honest piece of writing. I accepted the idea that those endeavors were not my true calling. However, writing seems to be self-perpetuating. I'm in the marketing phase of publishing my second book, Volume 2 of My Pandemic Paradox, a memoir. It's a continuation of Volume 1 with the same name and cover design, but a different color. Volume 1 is blue, Volume 2 is green. Both books are compilations of my weekly blogs. Volume 1 was the first 50 I wrote, and Volume 2, 92 more. As I wrote them, I felt like random descriptions of my life in no particular order. However, looking back on them, I realized a few themes materialized. The most formidable was my mother's domination and my attempts at independence. The two incidents that allowed for this transition were my divorce from my first husband, a big bully, and the second, releasing myself from my gremlins, strong internal negative thoughts. My mother convinced me that I needed help in controlling my wild nature. So when I married my first husband, I felt he would protect me from myself. I wasn't aware of this until years later. You might say that I married my mother with a penis. It's not surprising that she didn't like him at all. He took over her role as controller or chief controller of me and our three children, constantly threatening, the type that threatens and never carries out the threats. He wasn't. At unpredictable times, he would act on his threats. My mother was jealous of the attention I received from my father, and my husband was envious of the engrossment I offered to my children instead of him. I discovered all these behavior patterns by searching for the truth and then writing them down. And that's the end.
Wow, that's amazing. And so encapsulated how writing these books, writing these posts that you did was twofold. It was a reaction to what was going on in the world with lockdown, but it also was you putting in its rightful place all of those experiences that shaped you and making the decision where you wanted to go from here.
Yes.
You know, that's I always love when an author in writing the book, I always say there's a huge journey because when that book is done, you are a different person than when you started writing it. And you
That's true.
you know, you
Right.
really said that.
Actually, the writing was the best therapy that I had because I was really working on it. I mean, it's work. You know, it's not like just, oh, yeah, I'm going to write any old thing and that's fine. What I hope for, one of the things that always was sort of on my conscious mind was that I hope that people, when they read this, first of all, I hope they read it, but saying that if they do, I would like to feel that they connect with some of the things that I talk about, and that by listening and reading, they can feel that it's an opportunity for them to do the same thing. I mean, it's not, it's the thing that made it happen was in some ways I'm unique. First of all, I'm still, well, yeah, so I'm aware of that. And people, will they meet me and I tell them I'm 92, they say, really, you are? I said, yeah, I really am. So, on the outside doesn't look so bad, but inside I'm a terrible mess. So anyway, but sometimes when you read something that someone else has written, and you can relate to it much more because it mimics some of the feelings that you have. And by doing that and looking at them sort of outside of yourself, you can gain insight into what is going on with you. So it's kind of like, well, not exactly therapy, but it sort of hints about that in some of the blogs that I've written. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because sometimes you are very unique, Lynn. First of all, you are very unique, that's for sure. But you're you're able to look at yourself and your experiences critically. And not all of us are. But sometimes when we read about someone else, it does shine a flashlight, and it helps us by association to say, oh, I get it. That's me too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You
So
know,
anything, it's funny when I'm in different conversations with different people and they talk about any topic, practically it feels like any topic. And I have to stop myself from saying, oh, I wrote a blog about that. Because, they're all over the place. One of the things that I noticed, a friend of mine has a terrible problem, and it continues throughout her life. It's always the same problem. And so when I got divorced, I remember I was in therapy at the time, and my therapist said to me, oh, what was your part in this whole saga? Well, nothing. I was a victim. No, he said, well, everybody, there's always a two-party thing. So you've done things that perpetrated the same thing over and over. And so when I wrote about that, which I did, it became a question of, was I receiving sort of internal gratification from perpetuating this situation, which always ended the same way, in a big fight and terrible, and all of that. So it was a taking responsibility for my part in my pain, which was secretly not my pain. It was secretly what I wanted to have happen. So I found that to be very interesting.
that's very enlightening. And, I think what you're saying there is important for people to hear, that, we all, and this is not victim blaming to say that we are all part of the situation that we find ourselves in, even if we're simply being complicit by the fact that we're not getting out of it, we are complicit, and which
Yeah,
does regenerate more and more and more of that situation.
right. So, yeah, so I was able to look at all of those things in a calm way. And instead of saying, my first reaction to my psychiatrist at the time was, haven't you heard one thing that I said?
Exactly.
Like, what is this? But and then, when I was able to accept the fact that I was part of the deal, and I had a part in it, and I couldn't just blame somebody else. So I had to take the blame. It was difficult.
Absolutely. It's also empowering. It's very difficult to hear that you're part of the situation, but actually, by you being part of it, gives you the power to not be part of it. If you,
Yes.
if you give all of the power to the other person and you think that you're just not any part of this. You've given over all of your power.
Yes.
You're the person who mentioned this to you, which of course I'm sure angered you at first, was actually empowering you by that statement.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you get it. You don't have to read the book.
Yep, good for getting those crazy Americans. Yes, there's a lot that you need to read in this book. So for all of our viewers, instead of being listeners, become readers. My Pandemic Paradox by Lynn Zimmering. This is volume 2. You could start with volume 1. You could read volume 1 after volume 2, but you definitely want to read them both because there's a lot of life lessons from a woman who we have an awful lot to learn from. Lynn, I can't thank you enough for joining me today and for inspiring me.
It was my pleasure. Really, I look forward to it. And maybe someday we'll get to meet in person.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.